So today we're going to be working on a program that has arrays in them, and we're going to put arrays in context. And essentially, so I'm going to demo this program that I have here. And the idea of this program is it asks you for a certain amount of days. And the idea is that we're going to sell a certain number of tickets per day. And so it will keep track of that and it'll actually add our total number of tickets. And this is a very simple program, but we're actually going to do this utilizing arrays, and we're going to modularize the entirety of the program so that's easier to make modifications and it's more neat and sort of efficient. So it asks us for the number of days. So if I were to enter 3 days, it's going to ask me for the number of tickets that I sold on day 1, day 2, and day 3. If I were to enter 4 days, it would ask me day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. So if I could actually enter in, I can enter in values here for how many tickets that I sold on each day. And it'll actually tell me, it'll print out how many tickets I sold per day, and it'll give me the total number of tickets sold. So let's get started here. But before we move forward, let's look at the outline, our pseudocode, so to speak. So there will be a method called createArray, which will ask the user for how many days they want to track. And it's essentially, we're going to create an array based on how many days they've specified. So let's go back to our program here and actually just create that createArray method, right? So this is, of course, our main method. We don't have to worry too much about that. And then we're going to have a, it's going to be static. It's going to return an int array, and it's going to be called createArray. And of course, this is essentially going to create that array. So we can just simply ask the user for how many days they would like to track the tickets per day. So we're just going to say how many days enter days to keep track of tickets. Enter days to keep track of ticket sales. And we're going to allow them to actually enter in the amount of days by utilizing the scanner. Of course, the scanner doesn't exist in this particular context right now, so we're going to have to input that scanner. Now, this is giving me an error because I actually haven't imported the scanner statement. So if I do that, I should be fine. Also recall that our methods are actually condensed within the class, and the class here is essentially not where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to contain the methods, so we're going to have our class be there. This is giving me an error right now because I'm telling them that I want to return an integer array. So as of now, I've only asked them for the amount of days they'd like to keep track of in terms of ticket sales, and they've entered in an amount of days. But I want this method to create an array. So what this is going to do is it's going to essentially create an array. And it's going to be called, we could really just call it array, and it's going to keep track. It's going to essentially open up these boxes in memory within which I can actually enter in how many tickets I had for each day, or how much I sold for each day. So it's going to create an array, and it's going to be equal to a particular length. So essentially this first bracket here just signifies that we're creating an array, and this next bracket is actually expecting an integer, and this integer will be the length of the array. So if I were to enter 3 inside this box, it would allow 3 boxes to be created within which I could actually enter in how many tickets I have sold for each day. So these boxes, the length of the array actually resembles, or actually, it actually resembles how many days I have for my ticket sales. So these days are going to be specified by the user. So I'm just putting days inside this bracket here. So I've declared a new variable, and then I'm just going to return, I've declared a new array, and I'm just going to return that array essentially. So I think that's fine. So we have, we've created a method which allows us to get an array, created method which allows us to get array of certain length. And again, the length is akin to the days, right? So as of now, we've only created an array, or we've created a method which has the ability to create an array of a particular length, which is essentially just creating an array for a number of days. So if they were to enter 3, it would just create 3 boxes within which they can actually put in how many tickets they have for each day, or each box rather. And we haven't actually filled in anything yet. So the second part of this program here is essentially going to say that so we've created that create method array, right? And that this array will be sent back to main, which is why we use the return keyword and just return that array. The next method will fill the array. So it's going to populate the array with how many tickets you have for each box or for each day. And so essentially we come back here. So we've created create array. Now we're going to create another method called, it's going to be called, let's say fill array, right? So in this one here, we're going to actually be returning another array, which is going to essentially fill the first array. So we say int, because it's going to be an array of integers. It's going to be called fill array, right? And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to take in any array. Now the idea is it should be able to take in this array that we have here, or that we've created here. So the array that's created in this one is essentially going to be loaded into the parameters of this one, and then it will populate that array that's loaded into this method. So I'm going to say int array here, just like this, and what do we want to do, right? So it's going to take in an array that we've created, and this array will actually have the length that we've specified in here, because we're essentially just creating an array, and this array will be the array that we have specified inside these parameters, which we're going to fill, is essentially just this array, right? So the plan is to create an array and then fill it in here, fill that same array here. So we use a for loop, int I equals 0, I should be less than array.length. And again, array.length is the same length that we created here. So when they create, when we ask them for the length or how many days, that will be carried down here, because this array is essentially the same array that we've created here. And since this array has a length, this array will have a length as well. And so when we say array.length, we're actually talking about a very specific value which has been carried through. So essentially I have a for loop here. It consists of 3 things. First, we're initializing, I guess we could call these index, where the I essentially is representing the index. And what that does is it as it iterates, as it increments index to 1, to 2, to 3, or however many times, but it must of course be less than the array.length. It will essentially just grab, or essentially it will refer to each element in the array. So if my array.length was 3, or suppose the user specified 3 boxes, or the three days rather, it would be 1, 2, and 3. Or actually, it would be 3 boxes, but the indexes that correspond to those boxes would start from 0 and then go up to however many boxes there are. So the index should be less than the array.length. The array.length in this case is 3, and the number of indexes is essentially 1 minus the length. It's 1 less than the number of boxes or days that we have. And so essentially that's a good relationship to carry forward, because we only want index to keep incrementing by 1 so long it is less than the array.length, because of this relationship here. So what we're going to do to fill the array is we are going to essentially just refer to an element in the array, and we're going to fill that in with a ticket. We're going to fill that in with an integer called TicketSales. Enter amount of tickets sold for day, and we're just going to say day here, and then we're going to do index plus 1. And then we're going to give them the ability to actually enter in how many tickets they sold. And then we're going to refer to, as we iterate through, index is going to first be 0, then it's going to be 1, then it's going to be 2. So as it's going from 0 to 2 or 3 or however many times, which is, of course, array.length times, it's going to essentially refer to an element. And when it's referring to an element, of course, these arrays are empty at the given moment. But as we iterate through and we equate it to whatever they entered, those boxes will be filled in with ticket sales, an amount which they've specified. So it's giving me an error because at the present moment, what I've done is I've declared ticket sales twice, which is probably not good practice. Only declare it once outside the for loop, and essentially then just refer to ticket sales inside. And so also I need a scanner here. So I think I've achieved the purpose of populating the array. And after I populate that array, I'm going to return array, which was populated. So let's see what this does here. So I've created an array, right? And I'm going to call this array equals, so I'm going to create an array and I'm going to store that array inside here. Create array, and then I'm going to invoke the fill array method. And essentially I'm going to load that array inside here. See if this works. Okay, that works. So we've only filled the array and we've created the array. And now what we're going to do is we are going to create a method to calculate the sum. Or actually, let me print out the amount of tickets that we have for day 1, day 2, and day 3. So essentially, we're going to create another static method, and it's going to be void. We're just printing out, and it's going to be called print, and it will take in a array. And again, this is the same array that we created. We're creating these methods to load them. We're creating these methods, and it's going to just load in the same array that we're referring to each time. And it's going to be an integer array, right? So what we're going to do here is we want to print out the value. So we're assuming that this is essentially the array that was created. And this is populated by this point. So if it's populated, we're going to print out, we want to print out every single element. So we're going to use a for loop and traverse through the array. Now, at the moment, if I just do I, it'll just print out everything that is inside the array. It's not going to actually say what those values are. So if we do 3 days and we have 20, we have 21 and 20 again, it's not doing anything with those values. But if we actually call the print method and we load it with the array that we're constantly referring to in our main method here, you'll see that we're printing out those values that we just entered. So we enter the days to keep track of the ticket sales, let's say 3 days, and we do 30 or 20, 20, and let's say 21. It's not so essentially this is interesting. It's not giving me 20, 20, and 21. It's giving me 0, 1, and 2. Because actually, okay, so why this is happening is because it's just printing out I. I is 0 for the first iteration, for the second iteration. So for the first iteration, I is 0, it prints out 0. For the second iteration, I is 1, it prints out 1. For the third iteration, I is 2, it prints out 2. And so actually, I don't want it to print out I want it to print out an index. The first, so I want to reference the array that I'm currently talking about, and I want it to print out index 0, index 1, index 2. So when I say array of I, I'm actually referring to the array that I've entered here, and then this is going to be 0 for the first iteration, so it's going to grab the element at the 0th index, and then it's going to increment I by 1, and then it'll grab the element at the first index, and then it'll increment I by 1, and then it'll grab the element at the second index, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to do index, or I'm going to do I, to let I increment and actually grab that index. And so now I should actually be able to get those values back. So if I say 2 days and I say 20 and 22, it'll give me those values back. So it's doing exactly what I want. So I'll just say here, I'll say tickets sold, right? Tickets sold. And so now it's going to say tickets sold on day, so it's going to say tickets sold, but I would like for it to do tickets sold on day 1, day 2, day 3, right? So tickets sold on day, and I'm just going to do day. And essentially then I'm going to concatenate index plus 1 or I plus 1 rather in this case, so that instead of saying so it would be tickets sold on day, if I were to do I would just keep incrementing from 0 onwards, right? So if I were to do this, you can see that saying tickets sold on day 0, tickets sold on day 1, but I don't want to start the count from 0, so instead I just do index plus 1, or I plus 1 rather, and that would just essentially it'll start the count from 1 instead of from 0, and so now it actually reflects something which makes more sense, sort of, right? And so it says enter days to keep track of tickets. If I say 2, and I say 20, and I could say 21, and then it would say tickets sold on day 1 and tickets sold on day 2. So that just seems that just makes more sense. And I'm going to have a colon between these values here. I think that would work. So we have pretty much everything we want. We've created an array, we've filled the array, we've printed out the array, and now we just want to print out how many tickets were sold in total. So we're gonna have a static void array here, or actually, yeah, we're gonna return an integer, which is just gonna be the sum of the temperatures, or not the temperatures, sorry, the tickets. And in this case, it's going to be called compute total. It'll take in an array here, and that array will of course be the same array that we're referring to in this whole throughout this whole entire program, which is just one array that we've created in the create array method. And essentially we're going to use a for loop. I should be less than array.length for reasons we've already talked about. And we're going to have a sum variable, right? So it's going to be an integer because we're going to add these ticket sales here, and they're not in decimal points. So it's going to be 0, and essentially it's going to, sum will equal the first value in the array. So that would be index 0. So essentially we by now we have let's see here. So by now we have an array which was created, which has these indexes starting from 0 to 1 to 2. And essentially, so this was creating the array of a particular length. This was essentially, these are just the indexes that are assigned to the length or to each box which holds an element. And when we did fill array here, we said fill array. Fill array will actually enter in something inside these boxes. So by now we have, let's say, 24 tickets on day 1, 25 tickets on day 2, and 23 tickets on day 3. So these things are really important to understand, that the number of days is 3, indexes 2, 0, 0, 1, and 2. It's 1 less than the number of days. And we know that the days, essentially the number of days, is akin to the length of the array. Okay. So we have an array, we filled the array, we have our indexes, and so essentially now we want to keep track of the sum. So we're going to take that same array, and of course we're referring to the same array here when we load it. We're referring to, so then what we do is we create a sum variable called 0, and sum is equal to the first index. So it grabs 24 and it equates that to sum. Then on the, so now sum is equal to 24. On the second time around, for the second iteration, which is of course bringing us to the first index here, the second element, we want to add 25 to the sum. So now the sum will equal what the sum was before, which is of course just 24, plus what the sum is now. In other words, what was at that particular index. So the way we represent this here is sum is equal to sum plus array at 1. We can't just say array at 1. We actually have to use index because it's going to keep incrementing onwards. And so that would allow us to actually keep track of the sum. And since we're not using index, we're actually using I to keep track of the index here. And then after the sum is calculated, which it will be, we're just going to return sum. Okay. And we'll say that here in the main method, we'll say that the number of, well, we'll just say total number of tickets sold is just going to be, we're going to call on compute total, and we're going to enter in the same array that we've been referring to throughout this program. So if I say 2 days and I say 30 and I say 30 again, so 30 tickets sold on both days, it will actually give me the addition of those tickets, total number of tickets sold. So up until now, I think this is completely fine, but you'll notice that we actually have some problems. Problem is we can enter 0 days. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Why are we keeping track of the number of tickets for 0 days? So essentially, when they enter the number of days, which is of course just the length, I want to add a constraint. So when I say enter the number of days, I'm going to say, look, if the days that they're entering is less than 1, right? Because I want them to at least have 1 day. Is less than or equal to 1, rather. Then and only then can you sort of set this array. Then and only then can you declare the new array with length days. Now this becomes problematic because I've declared something. I've declared the array here to have a particular number of days, but int array doesn't exist outside these blocks. So it's best to actually declare the array outside. And then initialize it inside here. So I had to pause it here to essentially get clear what I was doing, but essentially I created an array here, and it's asking to keep track of the numbers of tickets sold per day. And if the days is greater than or equal to 1, it has to be at least 1. Then and only then will we let the days that they entered sort of signify the length of the array. Otherwise, we're just going to print this error here. And it's going to keep doing this. It's going to keep asking again and again for how many days would you like to keep track of the number of tickets sold, sort of until while the number of days is less than 1. So it has to be, this whole thing has been about at least making the number of days at least 1. So now you'll notice that we actually can't put in, -2 days or, 0 days. We'll actually have to put in a positive amount. So we've taken care of that problem, but over here it says enter the amount of tickets sold. And this becomes problematic because we can actually enter a negative number. So we want to actually fix that as well. So we're going to go to where we actually fill the array and we enter in the amount of tickets sold. And essentially we're just going to say, look, if the ticket sales is less than 0, or if it's greater than 0, then we'll allow sort of the array for that particular index to essentially equate to the ticket sales, right? Otherwise, we'll print out an error and we'll say, we'll essentially say must have at least 1 ticket sold. And let's see if that sort of alleviates our problem here. So if I say 3 days and I say -2, oh, okay, so it's it essentially, it says must have at least 1 ticket sold. But I think it goes forward with the for loop, which is not actually what I want to happen. So essentially, let's see. So it says enter the amount of tickets for day 1. So if the tickets are greater than 0, then and only then will I set that particular index to ticket sales. Otherwise, I'll tell them this. But of course, I want to sort of keep doing this until they enter in a positive amount. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a do while loop, right? And I'll just keep doing this while ticket sales is less than 0. So they have to enter a positive value to sort of leave this particular block of code. Or in other words, to continue with the program. If I say 3 and they enter -2, they can just keep entering negative numbers. It says enter the amount of tickets sold for day 1. Yeah, so they can just keep entering negative numbers until they enter a positive number. It'll let them continue with the next day. And so I entered 30 for day 1, 20 for day 2, but I keep entering negative amounts for day 3, And so until I actually enter in a positive amount, it won't give me the information that I want. And so that sort of takes care of that eventuality there. And so this is just about essentially making a program and then toying with the program and seeing if you're actually entering in values which, if you're able to enter in values which don't sort of properly sort of reflect um, what you want the program to reflect. And so this, so yeah, so this is pretty much all I have today on arrays.